I've played tons of different games, and while it's easy to look up a library of games and pick from a wide variety of different ones, I like to keep an eye out for games that we never had the chance to check out, games that were canceled or promoted and never saw the light of day. It's an interesting little sub-aspect of video game history that's commonly overlooked, but one community member in particular thought it'd be cool to talk about, WreckDirector, whose idea was selected for January's Firefighter giveaway episode. So that's what we're going to talk about, my top 10 games that fans got excited for that never came to fruition. Shout out to WreckDirector for suggesting this, you're awesome, and I hope you like this episode. Let's begin. LA Noire was a magnificent game, chocked to the brim with everything that made 40s Los Angeles famous. The behaviors, the culture, the music, the language, it was epic. And what was even more epic was that there was a proprietary motion capture process that made the game shine. They used hundreds of cameras to capture every comprehensible angle of the human face, which translated to a one-to-one representation of the same in-game. It made interrogations a critical part of the game. I, for one, was beyond excited to see what Team Bondi was going to do next, and there was a whisper on the wind what the next game was going to be, potentially released in 2015 for the PS4 and more. It was going to be known as Horror of the Orient. The setting was pretty cool too. It would have taken place in 1936 Shanghai. It would have been a criminal story just the same as LA Noire from a different perspective. Developmentally, it was going to be designed by not only Team Bondi, but also Chrome Studios. They made Ty the Tiger, if you remember them. Team Bondi was primed and ready for that project, but unfortunately, there was some fuck shit going on behind the scenes for Team Bondi. In 2011, a group of folks created a now unavailable website known as LANoireCredits.com, of which provided a list of over 130 employees that were not correctly credited or were simply laid off during the production of LA Noire. Soon after, a series of emails was leaked that showed just how horrible working conditions were for the folks who worked at Team Bondi. This put a pretty serious black mark on the company, and when they reached out to buyers that same year, nobody wanted to touch them. There was roughly 1,400,000 Australian dollar dues that were owed to the developers and other employees. So what happens if you don't pay your employees, you treat them like shit, nobody wants to buy your company? You close, and with that, your ideas fade away into the nether. Horror of the Orient was affected by this, and the only thing we have is a handful of leaked game footage. It's a shame too. I would have loved to play this. This one hurts to talk about because it's a company that was annihilated by EA, Pandemic Studios. To me, Pandemic had a rich history in doing a few things well versus other companies that did tons of games, casually, ones we might say are mid or just half-assed. If ever there was a company I wanted to see succeed in a modern era of gaming, it would have been Pandemic. And one game they were supposed to release was Batman: The Dark Knight, based on the Christopher Nolan film. Now, if you know anything about the Nolan films and the games that aligned with it, Eurocom released a game for the previous film, Batman Begins, and it was published by EA. But it didn't stand out. It was a pretty boring game to me. In fact, most movie-based games are. Sorry, not sorry. It's the truth, at least from my experience. Now, I don't know, nor can I assume who made the decision to try to use the assets from Batman Begins for The Dark Knight, but we do know that the developers could not incorporate it with their vision. It was simply incompatible, and they needed to rebuild the game from the ground up, to which EA said, nope, fuck you, and guess what? They lost the rights to Batman because of it. It went back to Warner Brothers, who proceeded to immediately work with Rocksteady to create the Arkham series. EA could have made hundreds of millions of dollars, and soon after, Pandemic would be acquired by EA, and then immediately shredded into non-existence. Thanks, EA. Fucking assholes.
It has to be kept secret.
So I added this one to the list because it's been kind of floating around in the ether for a while. Deep Down is an action role-playing game, and it's very similar in aesthetic to Dragon's Dogma, if you've ever played that. The premise is cool as well. It takes place in a far future version of New York City with people known as Ravens who can recover ancient memories by touching artifacts. We would explore the city, take on monsters of legend. It looked damn good. But it was mentioned in 2013, and it was supposed to be produced by Yoshinori Ono, the guy who's been keeping the fire of Street Fighter alive. And since 2013, we haven't heard anything about it. If we look up the trademark, we can see it's still active, and it was filed for continuation in 2023, but Ono doesn't work for Capcom anymore. so I don't know if there's any interest from the company to make this game come to life. I think it would be cool, but between me and you, I'd be too afraid that with the industry favoring Souls-like games, that this would probably be a mixture of Dark Souls and Monster Hunter, and I don't know how I'd feel about that. While we're on the topic of quality-looking action RPGs, Platinum Games had one as well, known as Scalebound. It was a cool idea where we could go through the world of Draconis, accompanied with our dragon, Thuban. Those two characters are bounded together, or scalebound, and in the game we're supposed to be able to issue commands to our dragon or sort of link inside the dragon's mind with Dragon Link mode. Sounds pretty cool. The problem is, when this game was originally pitched, it was 2006. And around that time, they had the opportunity to work with Sega, so they put their focus on that instead, that game of course being Bayonetta, which was a massively successful game. Then they cracked open the books again and went as far as to make a prototype, but Nintendo wanted a game, so they focused on that, and that game would be The Wonderful 101 on the Wii U, which unfortunately wasn't a successful game. Then they finally got the chance to make it with Microsoft, but it was delayed and inevitably canceled. But why? Platinum Games wasn't a bad studio, they still aren't. But at the time, they weren't experienced in the engine that Microsoft wanted them to use, the ever so popular Unreal Engine. Due to this lack of experience, they struggled to meet deadlines, and Microsoft said, you know what, never mind. This is actually a game I think I would have loved to have checked out. It looks so damn cool. But that's how it goes nowadays. Consumers aren't patient like they used to be. They want these companies to shit out AAA titles like nobody's business without any regard for the effort that it actually takes to make it work. Then when it doesn't work, they turn to Twitter to complain. It's gotta be a thankless career. Stealth games, they aren't for everyone. In fact, when it comes to stealth games, I'm probably the poster child for the worst person on the planet at them, because of my level of patience. Many of you have seen how I just face roll games in blatant disregard for most of the well-designed gameplay elements such as controls and mechanics. I try my best, but when it comes to stealth games in particular, that's where I have a shortcoming. We all know Hitman, Assassin's Creed, Splinter Cell, or maybe even Metal Gear Solid, but one game from Rockstar North was going to be one that may have given the other games a run for their money at the time: Agent. The whole pretense of Agent was that it was going to be set during the Cold War with this whole element of counterintelligence, espionage, and political assassinations. So in some ways, it was going to be the most hands-on spy game that I had ever played, or at least that's what it was supposed to be. But in my humble opinion, if there ever was a company that consistently puts out great ideas and then magically yanks them away, it would be Rockstar. They've done it countless times. Bully 2, anyone? That was a game that I wanted to come out, but it never did. And curiously enough, it's always after some bullshit leak that these games mysteriously get canceled. But if we return to Agent, it seems like it was fully intended to get created, but then this fancy little game called Grand Theft Auto 5 popped up, and once that game was involved, fuck the rest, right? I've never been to Rockstar Studios, but they probably have like 50,000 monkeys chained up in a building that only work on that game, and it frustrates me to no end that so many other projects have been cut because they want to milk the dirty chapped nipples of GTA 5 until they bleed. From a game that was announced in 2013 to a trademark that was abandoned in 2021, we will likely never see this game, and that's a shame. This one is one that I feel most people were kind of frustrated about, and I don't blame you. Mega Man in the 3D world was something that caught us off guard. Mega Man always ran to the right and left, and now he's in the real world talking to real people. At least that's how it was in Mega Man Legends or Mega Man 64. The second game is the one that cost people a lot of money, The Misadventures of Tron Bonne, but for all intents and purposes, colloquially, it's known as Mega Man Legends 2. Capcom was primed and ready to work on Mega Man Legends 3, and they worked their asses off to make it, at least long enough to create a prototype version that only one person from the public played: Chris Hoffman from Nintendo Power. And then in 2011, they canceled it. When pressed about it, Capcom UK straight up blamed the consumers for their lack of interest. Logically, the fan base said, hey dipshits, we actually wanted this game, so what the fuck's your excuse? And that led to a generic apology and an internal blame game. Now what's crazy is that Mega Man Daddy Keiji Inafune and countless other developers have offered to work on Mega Man Legends 3, and every single time, Capcom shuts them down. So at the end of the day, it's 100% Capcom's fault this game never got released. Well, we gotta talk about Starcraft, right? That was an epic game. For many, it showed that the RTS genre could be a mixture of fun and fair, something that was not made evident by Warcraft. I'm sorry I shit on Warcraft, but I feel the first game is so grossly unplayable that I can't justify not shitting on it. It ruined my day fairly consistently. But Starcraft, man, that was awesome. Some of you might have even had the luxury of checking it out on the Nintendo 64. For the longest time, I didn't even realize that it was on the Nintendo 64, but it was, so check it out if you want to. As with most Blizzard IPs, we were never really certain what they would do next. They were pretty locked tight unless they mentioned games at BlizzCon, which started in 2005. Now, for anyone unsure of the history of Blizzard, I did do a Ready Go Gaming show talking all about it, and I would encourage you to check it out. I'll link it down below and at the end of this video. Prior to 2005, we had games like Warcraft 1 through 3, Diablo 1 and 2, and one of my favorite MMORPGs, World of Warcraft. But the one game that was announced prior to the convention that never saw the light of day was Starcraft Ghost, which was supposed to be a stealth action video game developed by Nihilistic Software. The problem is, Nihilistic Software was plagued with delays, so they let Swing and Ape Studios take over, and by 2005, it still hadn't come out. So, Blizzard effectively canceled it. The leading character was supposed to be Nova, a ghost, hence the name, and while we never saw her in her own game, she was a character in StarCraft 2, and one of the characters in her own little book, named StarCraft Ghost Nova, so she wasn't lost to time. I've never played Prey, but I've heard nothing but awesome things about it. The first game was a massive commercial success, and as with most first-person shooters that see commercial success, both consumers, and more importantly publishers, want to see them continued. The first Prey was developed by Human Head Studios and was under contract by 3D Realms and published by 2K. The game had these epic-ass features that revolve around the main character we play as, Tommy Tawati, a Cherokee tribesman that's abducted, along with his girlfriend and his grandfather, by a group of aliens. This group of aliens collect organic and inorganic material, bring it to their space station, which consumes it, right? Just makes sense. Outside of that, we can rely on Tommy's Cherokee heritage to do all of the spiritual stuff that progresses the gameplay. It was a badass first-person shooter through and through. But 3D Realms did want a sequel. Now let's talk administration. Just as a reminder, Prey 1 was developed by Human Head Studios, under contract by 3D Realms, and published by 2K. In 2007, Scott Miller, the big guy at 3D Realms, announced that Prey 2 was coming, and he was going to align it with a new development studio he was creating called Radar Group. Tracking so far? Fast forward to 2009 and the rights for Prey were transferred officially, that is to say on paper, from 3D Realms to the Radar Group, who then transferred it to ZeniMax Media, which if you don't know, is in charge of Bethesda. Fast forward to 2011 and the game still wasn't done. From every aspect of development, it was failing, so Human Head decided to stop development of the game, which led to the game entering development hell. And no, we never saw it. Bethesda did do a reboot with the rights in 2017, but I've never played it, so I don't know how it is. Have you? Feel free to tell us down below in the comments. This one hurt me, physically. As you all know, I adore Star Wars games, and for a franchise with such rich lore and cultural relevance, 9 out of 10 Star Wars games interest me. Not everything can be gold, right? One of my favorite Star Wars games growing up was Star Wars Bounty Hunter because it was so different from the other games in the franchise that I had played. To be Jango Fett and scan the people around us for bounties and getting into legendary gunfights to take in a man, cold or warm, that was pretty fucking cool. So when Lucasfilm Games announced Star Wars 1313 and told us it would be a story that revolved around a young Boba Fett, I was beyond stoked. By the way, the 1313, it isn't a year. It's a level of Coruscant, chocked to the brim with bullshit. Now, the game was supposed to involve George Lucas, who with his writing style could fine-tune the game's story to be something that we would all love. But then out of left field, Disney purchased Lucasfilms and LucasArts in whole, and guess what they did? They killed the studio, laid off everyone outside of save, 10 people, and turned one of the greatest game development studios of our time into a licensing agency. And that's all they did for a long time. Disney would take Star Wars games and outsource them to other companies to make a shit ton of money, like any greedy shithole publicly traded company would. Thankfully, in 2021, they announced they were making their own games again. But we can't make up for that era of cancellations and the lost time for games that could have been something. It's really frustrating. For a long time, Silent Hill has been the exact fucking same thing, and I don't say that lightly. It's been the fucking same thing. And to be honest, that's not always a bad thing, but the main competition for the whole survival horror genre historically has been Silent Hill versus Resident Evil. And if there's anything I've learned from watching the battle between Call of Duty and Medal of Honor is that you cannot keep doing the same thing unless you're gonna do it excellently every single time. Because consumers will inevitably get bored with your idea, and while Resident Evil really mixed it up in terms of play mechanics and perspectives, Silent Hill kept the same formula, in some cases remaking the game. So when we had the joint project PT between Guillermo del Toro and Hideo Kojima, that blew our minds. You had one of the best storytellers in Konami's arsenal with one of the greatest filmmakers in modern history, and you excited an entire demographic that was stoked to have a modern, badass-looking Silent Hill. PT stood for Playable Teaser, and it was essentially a proof of concept for Silent Hills, a game that would utilize the Fox engine that Kojima created for Metal Gear Solid 5: Phantom Pain. To quote my 1-year-old, what happened? Well, what happened was, Konami's full of fucking idiots. At some point in the late 2000s, they decided that video games just weren't cool anymore. It's not like they were losing money on their IPs, they just decided to use their IPs in pachinko machines and mobile games. And that creative difference caused a rift between one of the best producers the company had, and Hideo Kojima just turned around and left, never looking back. Good for him. But his departure was the nail in the coffin for the project. And that's it for today's episode. What did you think of this list? What canceled video games really pissed you off throughout your life? Feel free to let the community know down in the comments section below. Speaking of our community, if you made it to the end of this episode, you're already home in our community. We're a gathering of retro gaming enthusiasts that love remembering a time when life was just a little bit easier to live. And if you align with that, then feel free to subscribe. Finally, the single most important thing you can do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly impacts the visibility of the videos and the projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes. Fortefyre out.